For over 13 centuries, we've lived among you in the safety of anonymity. Witches are unknown in your modern world, until now.
What we have here is a failure to communicate. And it's not for any lack of trying on our part, because the language has been so twisted around that you can't possibly understand what I'm saying no matter how clearly and concisely I try to say it. For example, when I speak of witches, exactly what are you picturing in your mind right now? Perhaps the image you see in your mind is the green-faced hag from The Wizard of Oz, or perhaps some crazy, filthy old crone being chased off by the villagers in another movie. Or maybe it's the traditional warts-on-noses Halloween variety of witches stirring an evil-smelling cauldron full of some kind of filthy brew. Uh, or perhaps you subscribe to the old Webster's dictionary that defines a witch as an evil hag or a crone who has made a pact with the devil for her soul. Or perhaps you just think of all the witch hunts from, like the Salem witch hunts and the witch trials and the Inquisitions. Or perhaps on a lighter vein, your image of witches is the fantasy variety like Harry Potter or this fantasy witch here. The thing is that we are a real culture with ancient roots, and we are a real people. And anytime you mistreat or you spread foul rumors and stories about people who are a little bit different than you, it never gets taken very well. And not so much by witches either. Hello, my name is John Storm, and I am a hereditary witch and author of the Witch Clan Fantasy series. But I grew up in an actual witch clan. I was born and raised. There's not a breath that I've taken in this world that has not been as a witch. And I'd like to tell you something a little bit about our mutual history. See, it is a mutual history because most of you didn't just spring up 2,000 years ago as white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Before the advent of Christianity, your culture was something else entirely. And I need to take a few minutes in this video to put some history to rights. You see, the evidence of what we really are is all there, as opposed to what you've been told by the experts and the authorities of your day. I'm going to show you what you've been told as opposed to what we are, and try to peel away the illusion that you've been living under, and maybe explain a little bit as to why you've been living under it for so long. Please watch the rest of this. For over 4,000 years before the birth of Christ, witches and druids, described as two horns of the same bull by historians of the day, were the established infrastructure of Celtic society, even from the Bronze Age. It was more than just a primitive religion to a howling bunch of blue-eyed spear-chuckers. It was also our science of astronomy as studied at Stonehenge and understanding the resources in the earth around us. A Druid physician was unsurpassed in the best days of the ancient Greeks and Romans. Our bards were our sources of music, prose, and oral culture, and had a great deal of influence upon the politics of the land. A village with its own resident witches or druids was an especially fortunate one, as medical help was always available. The very best midwives in the world would be there to assist your childbirthing and mend your wounded farmers, artisans, and warriors. In a society that distinguished their clans and factions by colored tartans, a witch's black or a druid's white robes would distinguish them as a neutral power, thereby allowing them to travel without harm and guaranteed a warm place at the hearth wherever they set foot. The same power that would be occupied trying to save as many lives and mend as many wounds as possible for all the clans as we were responsible to the whole of our society. We were the magistrates who negotiated truces and treaties between warring factions and property disputes. We crowned or established chieftains and kings and advised on the planting and harvesting of crops and husbandry. Our bards were the traveling anchormen and spin doctors of the day, going from town to town with the latest little ditties of the valorous deeds or even the follies of some neighboring or distant dominion, thus swaying the masses to one cause or another by musical object lessons and catchy little limericks that politicians still use to this very day to make their own way. These bespelled people have grown up for generations believing they righteously serve a God of love and kindness and Christian charity. They will travel around the globe to preach and to minister to the needs of the pagans of Papua New Guinea, and yet they are oblivious to the admonitions of the God they claim to serve. The warlocks hold them in sway to murder and steal land and property from most of those same pagan peoples. History taught is a Thanksgiving tale of peace and sharing between natives and pilgrims, but no mention of the blankets laden with smallpox and those gifts to wipe out entire villages for greed, or the long and many testimonies of so many people slaughtered and abused for their worldly goods completely escapes them, and they see themselves as the most intelligent and charitable people in the world. They would be if something evil wasn't pulling their strings and making them dance to an evil tune. How is this done? Any mage of any stripe knows there are patterns and formula used in the crafting of talismans and spellcraft that makes them effective. They are archetypes and symbols that influenced untold generations of your ancestors and hardwired by time and repetition into your racial memory. I suppose I told you the most powerful faction of warlocks in the world have held an entire nation in thrall to them by spellcraft on a marvelous but not unprecedented scale for the past few centuries. These talismans being so big and on such a grand scale that they were built into entire cities and even woven into their buildings and architecture. We can tell you over and over again to see the pentagrams and the sacred geometry involved is so blatant in cities like Washington, D.C., and the general populace will still consider us as nutcases or alarmists, which is precisely what the warlocks want, as they are nowhere near sucking you dry yet. They just can't allow you to wander away in a huff before they've got the last gold coin they can possibly get from you, or send your sons and daughters to their deaths in the name of freedom, patriotism, and liberty, when the war is over nothing remotely resembling those things. In fact, quite the opposite. But why do you suppose this society is not fully woken up to these facts yet, when all the world bears testimony that this is the truth of what's happening and not what you were made to believe? They even warp the language to the point where when I identify certain things to you in full truth, your image of what that really is so skewed that you can't understand a single idea coming out of my speech, though I speak it as plainly as possible. My best and oldest example of this is what I say when I say that I'm a witch. And what I mean and what you're thinking are worlds apart, as the prevalent image is not the historical fact by any stretch of the imagination. I am neither stupid nor ignorant or an uneducated individual, but just telling people that I am a hereditary witch will alter their perception of who and what I am to a ridiculous degree that I lose all credibility and even status as a decent or productive and intelligent human being. And some will still not make the connection and say, well, why would you ever tell anyone you're a witch? Because I'm not gay, not a pedophile or a lunatic or Judeo Christian in ethnicity, and there is nothing really wrong or bad about what I am, a witch with every breath I've taken from the day I was born. Why should this be a secret to be kept from decent people? We were a successful and thriving culture for many thousands of years before these came along and set their own mark or stain upon the land. Exactly what and whom does this serve?